NCFR Pathways, Past, Present, and Future. This session has been a long time in the making, as you'll hear when I introduce our first two speakers. Mary Jo Czaplewski, Ph.D, CFLE. Dr. Czaplewski you all know her. She was the Executive Director of NCFR from 1984 through 1999. Before that, she was the Associate Dean of the College of Professional Studies at the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, and Department Head of Dietetics and Home Economics at Viterbo University in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Since her retirement from NCFR in 1999, Mary Jo has continued to contribute to NCFR, and we were absolutely thrilled when she stepped forward to work on the 75-year history project. Mary Jo teamed up with Jason Samuels, NCFR's Director of Innovation and Technology, to research and produce NCFR's 75-year online living history. Jason Samuels has worked for NCFR for 8 years. He started as a temporary employee, brought in to help cover the office during the 2005 conference, was subsequently hired as the full-time administrative assistant. Then I made him manager of information and technology, and this past year, promoted him to director of innovation and technology. He holds a bachelor's degree. This is where his interest comes from in this project. He holds a bachelor's degree in history from the University of Minnesota. He also has a political science minor or double major? Double major, political science. So his IT is self-taught. Amazing. And let's see, holds a bachelor's degree in history from the University of Minnesota and has thoroughly enjoyed and appreciated the opportunity to work on the NCFR History Project. Jason is especially proud of the work done in the course of this project to digitally archive every NCFR conference program, every NCFR newsletter, every TCRM paper ever presented, hundreds of other documents, thousands of photographs, and post them to the new online history book, where they serve as rich media complementing a living historical narrative which tells the NCFR story. So Mary Jo and Jason, you're on.
Well, hello everyone. It's been quite a while since I've been up here looking at all of you, although I can hardly see you because of the bright lights. I should have worn my sunglasses, I think. It's truly an honor to be here today and talking to you, my friends and colleagues of many years, and some of our new students and our new members. And I just have one big statement to make, and that is this organization is awesome. How many of you would agree? Good. The more I researched NCFR's history, the more I came to love the organization. And I'm sure many of you sitting here today do so also. So let's get started. How has NCFR's past informed and shaped the organization that exists today and prepared it for the vibrant future tomorrow? Join Jason and me as we look at some of the major threads that have woven the 75-year tapestry of NCFR and made it into the fabric of the future. This presentation will focus on major themes that have been prevalent throughout the organization's past, and we will highlight them with events and illustrate some of those themes on the screen. So you don't have to look at me, look at the screens. And I'm going to have to read it because, as some of you know, I can get waylaid by telling stories, right? Looking at the past without understanding the context in which these events shaped a family organization or a family is meaningless unless we take a look at what was happening in the United States to families in the 1930s when NCFR first began. The remnants of the 1929 stock market crash and the subsequent Great Depression that lasted into the 1940s formed the background for concerns among professionals of all disciplines for the impacts that it had on families and children. Poverty was rampant. Many families had lost everything. The Great Dust Bowl of the Midwest brought environmental deprivation to farmers and many families, and unemployment and child labor were widespread. Tuberculosis, child mortality, and sexually transmitted diseases were the prominent health issues of that day. But on the brighter side, Oscar Hammerstein had just finished writing Oklahoma. Worldwide, Europe was still recovering from World War I, while in the United States, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal sought to restore some of the economic and social equilibrium through the new federal programs that still exist today. For example, the Social Security Administration, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and the Federal Housing Administration, and others. However, we may not be having it too much longer. This was also a period of expansion of the nonprofit and professional organizations as new disciplines were born. For example, family counseling became marriage and family therapy around that time. It was in this milieu that NCFR came into existence on April 21st, 1938 in Chicago, Illinois, partially in response to those socioeconomic struggles. 3 men, each from different disciplines, but all concerned about families, joined together to initiate what they called the National Conference on Family Relations. Ernest Burgess was a sociology professor from the University of Chicago, and as the NCFR secretary, he set out recruiting regional and state leaders to form the very first regional councils. And remember, we did not have computers, we did not have Twitter, tweet, and internet. We had the old typewriters and the trains. So just kind of keep that in your mind. Rabbi Sidney Goldstein was the head of the social service department at the Free Synagogue in New York. He had already started the New York Conference on Marriage and Family Relations, and it was at his conference in New York that the idea of a national organization was hatched. And Paul Sayer was a law professor from the University of Iowa. He had also attended the New York Conference, and he became the first editor of Living, the precursor to our current Journal of Marriage and the Family. These 3 men met in Chicago on April 21st in 1938 and set as their goal to start NCFR and to hold its first national conference on September 17th, 1938, 5 months away. And you know, it takes us a year to prepare for conferences today. And if you look closely, you'll see a man standing in black suit. That's Rabbi Sidney Goldstein. And Jason found that in a closet in the Free Synagogue Museum. These 3 men, actually this meeting was held at the Hotel Pennsylvania in New York City. The theme of that meeting was the contribution of the family to the cultural wealth of the nation. And 500 professionals from many fields attended that meeting. I'm just going to go down a list of what kind of professionals attended that first meeting. I would like to give you the names, but it would take too long. Lawyers, religious leaders of all faiths, medical doctors and psychiatrists, business leaders, Wally Fulton, for instance, anthropologist Margaret Mead, writer and Nobel Prize winner Pearl S. Buck, home economists, and government and federal officers from many federal agencies in Washington. Before we go further, however, I would like to digress a bit to tell you a little bit something about NCFR's 75th anniversary book. You will not see a printed, bound copy anywhere at this time, though in the future there might be one. Diane is thinking about that. But after much discussion with Diane and Jason and other staff members, we concluded that NCFR's history is so rich that we needed to make it a living, working document, one that constantly changed, one that we will only research the core information for, and you would add the rest. So Jason Samuels and I began working on NCFR history research 2 years ago and spent thousands of hours poring over 106 boxes of NCFR materials in the archives at the University of Minnesota. Jason even traveled to New York to get the information about Rabbi Sidney Goldstein, and he uncovered a real gold mine. As we worked, several recurring themes began to stand out and seemed to carry through the entire 75-year period. So we decided to build today's presentation around those recurring themes, illustrating them with a few events, people, and products. And finally, to build this project on the latest multimedia platforms in order to make a truly living history, one to which you might add your tidbits and memories, and we hope that you certainly do. We've gotten a few, but we would like more. So briefly now, Jason's going to introduce us to the URL information that you can access online.
Thank you, Mary Jo. So very, very briefly, I would like to show you the fruits of our labor here with the NCFR history book. Again, this is just a website. It is history.ncfr.org. In the most basic terms, we have got an area for content in the middle, comments on the right, and navigation on the left. If you look through the table of contents, we have a standard chronological narrative, decade by decade here, where you can read year by year what has happened with NCFR. However, you can also go into the special pages here and browse by topic. If you browse by topic, you can view just a specific part of NCFR's history over a time period. So for example, you could say, I want to read about the conferences from 1961 to 1968, and it would give you just those articles. There's also a directory of NCFR leaders, which brings up profiles of people and all of the pages in which they are mentioned. Furthermore, throughout this narrative, every paragraph is commentable. So we've built this to invite the participation of the NCFR community at a granular level. And as Mary Jo mentioned, we have only put up the facts. This is really a skeleton history where we are hoping to now turn this over to the community to invite your memories and your stories about NCFR past. And eventually, we hope to do another revision of this book where those stories and those comments are incorporated to make the narrative that much richer. So whether you go and leave one comment or dozens, we hope that you visit the website and that you participate and you add your voice to this organization's history.
Thank you, Jason. Because of that huge amount of material that we already have, instead of listing chronologically the events that have happened, which would take hours, we're going to highlight this using 9 themes that we picked out that define NCFR as an organization over the 75 years. So those themes are, here's our name. Okay. First of all, NCFR has always had a friendly, inclusive culture, combining fun with work. Secondly, NCFR has always been a place for ongoing support of members of all career stages. It has been a place where information exchange through state and regional councils has been important. Knowledge exchange between researchers and practitioners. From the very beginning, NCFR has been an interdisciplinary organization. NCFR has also provided an annual forum, namely the National Conference, for 72 of its 75 years. NCFR values a multidisciplinary approach to both research and practice. It sets standards and criteria for its members. It affects social action to strengthen families through policy implications and education. And research has been the backbone of all the practice and policy work in NCFR. And as we go through the history, we'll see some of that. This excerpt from Ernest Burgess's 1938 letter states what the founders really envisioned for NCFR. And as I read it, stop and think about whether or not this still applies to us today. Quote, NCFR is an interprofessional organization of individuals, groups, and agencies to plan and act together on concerns relative to all forms of marriage and family relationships, unquote. Examples of the first theme that we found, our friendly, inclusive culture can be found in the early conferences, which often included entire families of those who attended, such as the conference in 1951 at Lake Geneva in Wisconsin. And some of you here still remember the 1971 conference in Estes Park. Newcomers were welcomed with special receptions beginning in 1980 at Portland, Oregon, and invitations to dinner with longtime members and attendees have been very popular over the years. Students of various universities were often brought to the conferences by their professors who paid their way. Later, student awards were initiated to encourage their scholarship and attendance at the conference. Many of the early attendees became lifelong friends and members of NCFR, as this slide of the Maces, Marion Hill, Ruth Jewson, and Evelyn Millis Duval illustrates. Many attendees collaborated together over their professional lifetimes to produce outstanding research and publications together, and some of them even married. So here are some slides of longtime friends over the years. Carl Fred Broderick and Mike Sporkowski, Tammy Henderson, Bill Doherty, and Theodora Ohms, Weta Westney and Velma McBride Murray, Leonore Bolin Johnson and Congresswoman Patricia Schroeder. And there's a million more that I would like to show you, but we just don't have time. Our early leaders and friends were NCFR members most of their lives. Rabbi Sidney Goldstein was of Irish-Jewish descent and a social justice advocate. Margaret Mead, famed anthropologist, chaired the Program Planning Committee of 1943, but that conference had to be eliminated because of the World War II, when the trains were taken over by the military and people couldn't get to the conference. Evelyn Millis Duval, how many of you know what her master's thesis was? Would you believe her master's thesis in biology was on mushrooms and fungus? Originally, she was going to go into the medical profession, and partially because she was a woman, and she also met her husband at that time, she decided to just do her master's in biology, and then she discovered sociologist and became She became a very well-known sociologist, scholar, and writer. And her popular books, for example, When You Marry, published in 1945, translated into many languages and sold over 1 million copies. Dr. Adolf Meyer was a renowned Swiss psychiatrist and neurologist who was the director of the Phipps Psychiatric Clinic at Johns Hopkins University, and he was also president of the American Psychiatric Association. Inclusivity extended to the minorities, foreign professionals, and famous persons. Here we have a picture of Estela Martinez, a longtime member and ethnic minorities section chair of NCFR. Alice Li-Shi Wu started the Taiwan Council on Family Relations, on families actually. And we have a picture here of Coretta Scott King, who received the Distinguished Service Award in 1988 with Leonore and Andrew Billingsley. Another theme of NCFR is that NCFR is a place for ongoing support at all career stages. From the very beginning, NCFR leaders supported careers of others interested in family disciplines. For example, Ernest Groves developed the first college credit course on marriage preparation in the United States at Boston University in 1922. Lank Osborne, for whom the Osborne Award is named, underwrote get this, $2 memberships to NCFR for his students and brought them to conferences from 1939 onward. And two of his students were Gerhard Neubeck and Richard Hay, both of whom became presidents of NCFR. So students who are out there, see, you can come up the line. In 1968, David Olson and Roger Rubin became the first student board members of NCFR. David eventually became NCFR president in 1989, and Roger became Groves president and chaired the Public Policy Committee and sections, and both have mentored many of their students. To support students and encourage their research and scholarship, awards were begun in 1970 with the very first student awards given to Elam Nunley and Sherrod Miller for their work in couples communication. And today, 43 years later, they're still both active. In fact, you can go on their website and get information about couples communication even today. And Felix Berardo was well known for his mentorship of students, and the Berardo Reward extends that legacy. Tony Jurek was also honored with the Osborne Award for his outstanding teaching and student support. Another theme of NCFR is the information exchange through the state and regional affiliated councils. In the very founding months of 1938, Ernest Burgess recruited over 500 persons and 4 regional councils representing 23 states. The New York Regional Council, which had already been ongoing under the direction of Rabbi Sidney Goldstein, included 10 states. And they held their first annual meeting on April 28, 1939 in Washington, D.C. In 1949, the keynote speaker for the New York Tri-State Council was former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. In 1939 also, the other 3 regions had their first council meetings. We had the Pacific Northwest Regional Council, which consisted of the states of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and British Columbia. The Southern Regional Council, which included Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Texas, and the Midwest Regional Council, which included Illinois, Ohio, Wisconsin, Missouri, Indiana, Kentucky, and Iowa. All of the leaders of these various regions formed a 23-member advisory board that reported their activities in the Living Journal during those first 10 years or so of NCFR. Also during those years, we had several foreign affiliates. We had several from Australia, Helsinki, Finland, Santiago, Chile, Haifa, Israel, Uppsala, Sweden, and London, England. By 1966, NCFR had 44 state, regional, and local councils. And by 1967, the first affiliate newsletter entitled Feedback was edited by Obert Kempson. In 1970, President Eleanor Luckey established an affiliated grant award, or grant fund, from, believe it or not, the unused presidential budgets. It became known as the President's Fund. A state or a region could apply for funds to start up or implement a special project, provided they could match the funds they were asking for. In 1973, the Congress of Affiliated Councils was established with representatives on the NCFR board. All the affiliates were placed under the NCFR nonprofit tax status, and $1 of every NCFR member's dues was refunded back to the state of that particular member. The affiliates were required to make an annual report to NCFR. In 1979 was considered the peak year for state affiliates in NCFR. We had 49 councils representing 3,000 NCFR members. So that's a pretty good record. In 1985, the Congress of Affiliated Councils played an important role at the NCFR National Conference here in Dallas, Texas. Texas Council on Family Relations at that time was headed by Britton Wood, who sponsored a special reception featuring Ken Miedema, the blind pianist and author, who wrote and played a special tribute to Marie Peters, as the first award in her name was given to Harriet McAdoo from Michigan State University. Also, Maddie Gershenfeld did a leadership workshop for council members. And John Touliatis from the Texas Council also revised the Guide to Graduate Programs that year. Britton Wood was local arrangements chair also, so here we see a picture of him greeting David and Vera Mace, who were early members of NCFR and keynoted one of the 1985 plenaries. They were also the founders of the Association for Couples in Marriage Enrichment, ACME. And some of you probably remember that. What David couldn't say, Vera finished. And of course, that council was very memorable to Cindy and I because we had an incident that happened, a fire drill at 2 a.m. in the morning. Wish I could tell you all these stories, but I can't. In 1994 and 95, Libby Bloom was the president of the newly named Association of Councils. She chaired a governance task force on the councils, which recommended that a $5 rebate go to the states from NCFR members. In 1999, NCFR's adoption of the Carver model of governance under the presidency of Bill Doherty brought changes in the Association of Councils, and in 2000, Lane Powell did a bounce-back survey in which she asked, why would we even have affiliated councils? And here's what the summary said. We need Association of Councils for conference access, new information, collaboration with our colleagues, applied research, and visibility, continuing education, and mentoring. In 2006, we have the birth of 10 student affiliates from campuses, which grew to 2010 to 23. And how many do we have today? About 26, I think. I think we have 26 today. And I've seen it at the conference with all of the students, which that's good news. Another theme that ran through our research was knowledge exchange between researchers and practitioners. And of course, our strongest tool for that are the journals. NCFR journals are rated premier in the family field and have worldwide circulation. The first journal began in 1939 and was titled Living, and it's kind of a poor picture of it there, but there's a picture of it. In 1941, that journal became known as the Journal of Marriage and Family Living, and in 1964, it evolved into the Journal of Marriage and the Family. The second journal was given to NCFR by the E.C. Brown Foundation in 1968 as the already published Family Coordinator. In 1980, Jim Walters, the editor, changed the name to Family Relations, Journal of Applied Family and Child Studies. From 1974 to 94, NCFR published the Journal of Family History, edited by Tamara Haraven. And in 2009, under the founding editorship of Bob Millardo, NCFR initiated a new journal called the Journal of Family Theory and Review, and our new editor, which I just found out this week, is Libby Bloom. Other NCFR publications were diverse and expanded NCFR's publication venue and budget. For example, the many policy and position and resolution papers that were sent to Congress and to Washington, D.C., the inventory of marriage and family literature, first initiated by Reuben Hill and Joanne Aldis, then edited by David Olson, and later by NCFR and John Touliatis. the Sage Monograph series, edited by Yetzi Spray and many others, the Vision 2000 series begun by David Olson, the Decade in Review series of JMSF, which covered 10-year interval trends in the family field, and the Initiatives for Families, which was really two publications from the United Nations International Year of the Family, edited by Karen Altergott and Jan Hogan. Early in NCFR's history, practitioner publications and services were also offered. The very first teacher kits were compiled and sold for $1.70 in 1950. These were very popular with teachers, home economics teachers, and extension educators. Since 1950, many other family life education materials were made available. Since launching the Certification for Family Life Educators program in 1985, we have, in 1993, the Bible of Family Life Education, the Handbook of Family Life Education, volumes 1 and 2, edited by Margaret Arkus, Jay Shivanavelt, and Joel Moss. This was published by Sage. The Tools for Ethical Thinking and Practice in Family Life Education has been edited several times, but it was first compiled by the Minnesota Council on Family Relations. And Careers in Family Science has served many students. And the CFLE network, of course, is our CFLE newsletter, which enjoys wide circulation and reading. In the early days of NCFR, much emphasis was placed on exchanging research and practice as indicated by the following events. NCFR's leadership in planning the first World Conference on Families in Paris, France in 1948. And Evelyn Millis Duval, David and Vera Mace, and several others of our first leaders were at that conference. We also sponsored the very first U.S. interdisciplinary workshop on marriage and family research in 1950 in Chicago. This particular workshop laid the groundwork for the future Theory, Construction, and Research Methodology workshop. Another one was held in 1956. In 1940 and 1970, the White House conferences on children were planned by several of our NCFR leaders. And in 1948 and 1980, NCFR played an important role in the planning of the White House Conference on Families, those two conferences. In 1949, NCFR led the way in launching the International Union of Family Organizations, IUFO, with David Mace and Evelyn Millis Duval being our active NCFR representatives. Here is a photo of a 1960 Eisenhower telegram to us, and a picture of Harry Truman, who addressed NCFR in 1948 at the White House Conference on Family Life. From 1970...
in the security and the welfare of the family, because that's the fundamental unit on which all governments are formed. Governments are formed for the purpose of being of service to the family as a unit, in our conception of what government ought to be. For that reason, the welfare and the security of the family is vital to every government in the world.
You know who that was?
That was an actual clip from that.
Again, Jason found this in the archives at the Washington, D.C., right?
The Truman Presidential Library had that clip.
Oh, the Truman Presidential Library had it. And we managed to get a copy of it. So, and Harry Truman did invite NCFR to the White House during that conference and met with us and actually invited us to a reception there. So, pretty neat. From 1977 to 1995, NCFR was one of 5 national organizations in the Coalition of Family Organizations, COFO, which dealt with public policy in Washington. And Margaret Feldman often represented us, NCFR, at those meetings, and also at the COSA meeting, the Coalition of Social Science Associations, including, she also attended the United Nations World Conferences on Women in Nairobi and Beijing. Now we come to the next theme, and that is provides an annual forum for cutting-edge research and practice discussions. The annual conferences of NCFR, 72 in all, have accomplished the founding vision of Sayre, Goldstein, and Burgess. They have given roots to our sections, which started in 1938, focus groups, which started in 1978, awards, which began in 1938 with the Merit Award given to Frederick Osborne and have expanded to cover many awards since, public policy concerns, which were discussed and acted upon as early as 1938 when NCFR sent a statement to Washington on income maintenance bills. NCFR has continued public policy, education, and mentoring ever since. Theory, Construction, and Research Methodology Workshop was started in 1974. And the conference has provided joint collaboration with other organizations such as AAMFT, the Extension Specialists, AAFCS, the academic institutions, international scholars, for example, our Russian scholars, and governments. Conference tools were invented to serve our attendees better, such as the Media Awards Competition, the Work-Life Summits, the pre-conference workshops, military families workshops, extension pre-conferences, oral histories by the ethnic minorities section, the theory, construction, and research methodology workshops, the sessions such as RUPS, MUPS, PUPS, and whatever else. Research updates for practitioners is the one I remember the best. Our exhibits, and of course, our ever-popular poster sessions. In this slide, you see 16 former presidents gathered at the 1994 conference in Minneapolis, and Gerhard Neubeck at the 2000 conference doing one of his famous Neubeck poems. Over the years, our NCFR conferences have all been outstanding, but some of them stood out, and I'm just going to mention a few of them to stir our memories of memorable moments, and then I'm going to mention a few about the memorable venues. So for the memorable moments, we have Pearl S. Buck delivering the keynote speech entitled At Home in the World at the 1941 conference. In 1960, we held an international conference at which 14 countries were represented. In 1963, our 25th anniversary, we celebrated it in Denver with the President's Book, and that's a very interesting book to get your hands on. In 1970, we had the birth of Family Action and the student board members on the board for the first time, and they were David Olson and Roger Rubin and Graham Spanier. And we also had the beginning of the Family Action section, and all that took place in one meeting. In 1975, the Black Caucus was organized by Robert Staples and a group of other buddies of his. In 1980, the Ethnic Minorities section was inaugurated by Harriet McAdoo, and the oral history tradition began. In 1983, Ruth Jewson retired as executive director of 28 years, and Jim Walters produced a historic and entertaining slideshow of NCFR history in which he got a hold of baby pictures of some of the past presidents. In 1945, at the Portland Hilton, Alexis Walker's presidential speech on the remote control was highlighted and garnered national attention.
After I needed to come up with a project for students enrolled in my upper division course on gender and family relationships. Why not, I thought, use this relatively unresearched topic of couples in the RCD to stimulate student curiosity and at the same time pursue my feminist-inspired interest in the mundane experience of everyday life. Over the past 20 years, feminist scholars have shown that ordinary, routine, run-of-the-mill activities that take place inside homes every day bear an uncanny resemblance to the social structure.
Brings back lots of memories, and it's so good to hear her voice. In 2000, U.S. Senator Paul Wellstone received a Distinguished Service to Families Award at the 2000 conference, and here you see Michael Benjamin and Paul and Sheila Wellstone. Now for some memorable venues, and I'm sure some of you sitting here will remember some of these. In 1951, there was a college camp at Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and all of the families who attended NCFR conference that summer went to camp. In 1971, we had the Estes Park YMCA of the Rockies camp, where all the families again gathered, and many cots collapsed, and there are lots of other stories. And in 1973, when we had our first conference in Toronto, Canada, many students who later became NCFR leaders delivered their very first papers there. For example, Pauline Boss, Dennis Orthner, and Jay Mancini. That was the first time they had been to NCFR and delivered papers. In 1974, the largest conference in our history, which was a joint conference with NCFR and AAMFT in St. Louis during Lee Axelson's presidency, we had 1,500 people attend, and it was at that conference that the Theory, Construction, and Research Methodologies workshop was launched by Reuben Hill and Ivan Nye. And in 1988, NCFR's 50th was celebrated at the Peachtree Hotel in Atlanta, where it is claimed that several of our attendees are probably still wandering around in the towers. Remember the two towers? Both Evelyn Millis Duval and Ruth Jewson attended and were honored that time. In 2000, Minneapolis, we had a very lively local arrangements committee, pictured here, who worked to put on a silent auction for a transitional women's shelter in St. Paul, and at that auction we raised $2,500. So here are some of the Minnesota Council people and the Minnesota Local Arrangements Committee. Another theme that we found was that NCFR values a multidisciplinary approach. NCFR has always been a multidisciplinary organization in studying families, even in this age of specialists. This is obvious in its support of the sections and focus groups where those with mutual interests could share their research and practice with one another. The sections underwent many metamorphoses over the years. In 1938, there were 23 various disciplines represented with an advisory committee to the board of NCFR. In 1951, the sections grew out of these committees and communicated regularly through steering committees and in pivotal planning of the annual conferences. By 1953, we had 9 sections with chairs serving on the program committee, but not yet on the board. In 1962, all the sections were dissolved and finally restructured into only 4, and that lasted for about 10 years. And those 4 sections were titled Counseling, Research, Education, and Special Emphases. How many of you were members at that time? So you probably remember it. In 1970, we also had the birth of the focus groups, which grew out of the Family Action Task Force. In 1980, the Ethnic Minority section began under the leadership of Harriet McAdoo, and this section started as the Black Caucus, founded in 1970 by Robert Staples and a group of his friends. The theme of setting standards and criteria has followed through NCFR's history from the very beginning. They've always been concerned about family life education. For instance, President Osborne's address in 1948 was titled, "The Role of Professionals in Family Life Education." In 1944, the annual conference focus was on professional education and standards for marriage and family counselors. And in 1951, NCFR participated in the U.S. Commission on Teacher Education and Professional Standards. Committees on standards and certification were active in NCFR in 1963 with Elizabeth Force, who surveyed all states' requirements on teaching family life and sex education. In 1964, Vladimir Delisovoy taught and wrote curriculum for prisons, unwed mothers' homes, and encouraged regional council involvement. And in 1969 and 70, there was a series of 2-week training workshops in family life education, which were offered on several university campuses. And finally, in 1979, Kenneth Davidson chaired the Committee on Education Standards and Certification for Family Life Educators, and after many meetings with his committee and many drafts, the guidelines were implemented in 1985 and CFLE was born. In 1989, Dawn Cassidy was hired as a part-time director and continues today as the Director of Education. In 1990, a move to dissolve the CFLE program was diverted, and the program has been strengthened by the new examination, university-approved programs, several publications, a newsletter, webinars, and active websites. Another theme of NCFR is that NCFR affects social action through policy implications and education. One of the first concerns of NCFR founders was the need to bring public policy issues affecting families to the attention of the government and political bodies, given that the 1930s were a period of intense poverty and rapidly changing socioeconomic landscapes. In 1940, an NCFR committee on the family and national defense presented a report giving seven objectives needing action and the means to accomplish them. This was sent to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Also in 1940, Ernest Groves, Ernest Burgess, and Adolph Meyer were involved in planning Roosevelt's 1940 White House Conference on Children in a Democracy. This was held January 18, 1940 in Washington, D.C. Larry Frank wrote an article entitled "A National Policy for the Family," which was published in the Journal of Marriage and the Family, the winter 1948 issue. He also served as program chair of the National White House Conference on Family Life, sponsored by Harry S. Truman, who also spoke at the conference, and you heard the clip. So between 1971 and 76, many position papers were written on social issues and distributed to members of Congress, and we have several of those in the records, and I'm not sure that they're online. They are online. So it'll be interesting for you to go in and take a look at them. And from 1977 to 1995, the Coalition of Family Organizations was a policy voice for NCFR, AHEA, AAMFT, FSA, and FRC. And I won't go into all of the titles of them. In 1982, NCFR joined the Coalition of Social Science Associations, and from 1980 to 1990, the Family Impact Analysis Seminars conducted by Theodore Ohms and Stephen Preister for staff members in Congress was also included NCFR as a sponsor. And today, Karen Bogenschneider has taken over the Family Impact Seminars and delivered them to the states. Many leaders of NCFR over the years have played important roles in policy action. From 1983 to 87, Harold Feldman served as a researcher for the House Select Committee on Children, Youth, and Families. The Washington, D.C. Public Policy Committee of NCFR was active in congressional offices on policy issues and later sponsored policy seminars. And we have pictures of you up, some of you up there. In 1988, NCFR became active in the United Nations on family issues. Elizabeth Force was the original UN representative on several committees, and that role was later filled by Marilyn Benzman, who is currently mentoring Mahalia Robilia for that role. In 1994, Margaret Feldman and I attended an International Year of the Family Planning Conference at the UN headquarters in Vienna, Austria, which was followed by that year's IYF Conference in Black Mountain, North Carolina. And here we see Carlford Broderick, Harriet McAdoo, and Marvin Sussman giving testimony at a congressional hearing. And on this slide, you will see the 1994 IYF Conference in Black Mountain, North Carolina, and this slide shows members of the Planning Committee, of which Jan Hogan was the chair, and sitting next to her on the left was Henryk Sokolsky, the UN Director of the International Year of the Family. From 1999 to 2005, the public policy workshops were held in Washington, D.C., and included trips to the Hill, educational sessions, and here we see Elaine Anderson with Deborah Phillips and Michael Benjamin with Theodora Ohms. Another theme that is very strong with NCFR is that research is the backbone of all practice and policy work. The Minnesota Family Studies Center, started by Reuben Hill, Ira Reese, and Bob Leake from a $500,000 grant, trained many of our NCFR leaders and researchers. And when I saw the proposal and the list of all the students, I was just amazed because all of them are leaders in NCFR or were leaders in NCFR. Additionally, the Theory, Construction, and Research Methodology workshop begun by Reuben Hill and Ivan Nye has consistently produced cutting-edge research and methodologies by members of NCFR. Research is also demonstrated through the worldwide circulation of our journals, the report, and special publications of NCFR. So on this slide, we see the co-authors of the Sourcebook on Family Theory and Methodology: Bill Doherty, Susan Steinmetz, Ralph LaRosa, Pauline Boss, and Walter Shum. And I think that was just volume 1. There's another volume. The Handbooks of Marriage and the Family, edited by Sussman and Steinmetz, were also examples. And currently, the research of NCFR is transferred through YouTube, Facebook, the internet, our own website, and many new technologies. But even before that event, or before the advent of these new technologies, sometimes NCFR's leaders reach the mass audience through public broadcast television.
My next guest, Dr. Carlford Broderick, was with us a few weeks ago, and a most interesting and entertaining gentleman. He is a professor of sociology at the University of Southern California, director of its Marriage and Family Counseling Program, and also editor of the Journal of Marriage and the Family. Would you welcome, please, Dr. Carlford Broderick. Nice to see you again.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Thank you.
Because they don't have... Marriage is really just how to live, how to get along living together with somebody, and they haven't learned that yet.
Do you believe then, like a lot of youngsters today, that they live together for a year or so to find out if they really want to get married and try like a trial marriage? Margaret Mead suggested that, provided something like you sign a contract where you would have absolutely no children the first year. That would be one of the stipulations of living together to see if you could exist together.
The trouble is, a contract isn't a very good contraceptive.
That's true.
So that sometimes people have babies anyway.
Yeah.
I don't think the idea of going into a marriage or a relationship with the end in view is a good idea, because it's a bad model for the marriage later. You always think, well, you know, the end is in view, I can always get out. I think the idea of a marriage, you think of a poem or a song, I'm going to love you for 3 years and then we'll see. That's not the stuff that the marriage is made out of. You know?
I've never heard that tune. It's kind of catchy. I love you for 3 years and we'll see. We'll be right back after word.
Remember when Carlford was on the Johnny Carson show several times, and Jason got permission to use this clip. So we're at the age where NCFR promotes lifelong personal and professional relationships. This was a very strong theme throughout the entire history. And there are many examples of those relationships. In fact, many friendships have been made and forged for several generations of professionals who have mentored their students, and those students have done the same. And they have all become very close friends over the years. Back in 1945, David Folcomer seems to have summed up the feeling of many members that is still expressed today. So I'd like to read that quotation from David Folcomer. What excited me most in those early days was the amazing variety of professional persons from so many disciplines and organizations that were involved in some way. I have said many times that I could not have found a nicer group of humans to know and to work with over the years than those in NCFR, a very dedicated, kind, and caring group of people. So in the next few slides, we're going to see some of those personal and long-term friendships. And I'm just going to be quiet and let you look. Okay. In 2008, under Diane Cushman's leadership and Cindy Winter's connection with Dwight Jewson, an NCFR institutional identity pyramid was developed. As Jason and I found in researching the history, it tells us who we are, what we do, our institutional heartbeat or passions, and our big focus, which is families. And this pretty well sums up our trip through 75 years of NCFR history, which I've only just touched on here. The 9 themes are currents which run through these lifelong relationships of professionals working toward a common goal, that of strengthening families. But before I finish, I have one person without which this digitized history would not be possible, and that is Jason Samuels, our miracle man. Thank you, Jason, for all that you've done. He has been very patient with this lady who is not technologically endowed. And then I'd also like to thank Leonore Bolin Johnson for the wonderful photos that she has shared with us, many of whom you saw on the screen today. So, whither the future? Paul Amato. History is the foundation upon which all societies and civilizations and people build the future. So now Diane is going to introduce Paul Amato, who's going to give us his perspective on where NCFR goes from here.
We have a little surprise.
So before we move on to Paul, there are just a few more slides that Mary Jo doesn't know about in this presentation. Of course, through the process of this history, we found plenty of evidence of her leadership of this organization, from the newsletter photo when she was first hired, to her with Evelyn Millis Duval and Ruth Jewson, the previous longstanding executive directors. Mary Jo liked to cut a lot of ribbons to open conferences. She gave out a lot of awards. You see her here with Evelyn Millis Duval, giving speeches at the conference, working at her desk, working with Cindy Winter, probably on conference stuff. And here at her retirement party with Bill Doherty, and again with Ruth Jewson and with Michael Benjamin. Mary Jo, thank you for all you've done for this organization.
Thank you. honesty, I enjoyed every minute of it.
Thank you,
Even though
Mary
It did
Jo.
take a long time.
Thank you so much, Mary Jo. As Mary Jo said, you've kind of whizzed through 75 years of history with NCFR, and certainly our president-elect, and in a few hours, president, technically, at the end of this conference, but we're actually considering it official now. Really, yeah, you're officially, I think. Well, you and Elaine can talk about it and decide, I guess. He really probably needs no introduction, but for some of you maybe. Dr. Amato is the incoming president of NCFR, having served the past 2 years as president-elect. He's the Arnold and Bette Hoffman Professor of Family Sociology and Demography in the Department of Sociology at Pennsylvania State University. Dr. Amato is the past recipient of several awards, including NCFR's Reuben Hill Award for the Outstanding Research Article, at least twice, the Jesse Bernard Research Award, the Ernest Burgess Award. He was the NCFR 2003 Annual Conference Program Chair in Vancouver, right? We're going to be back in Vancouver in 2015. And in 2000 was named an NCFR Fellow, the highest honor awarded by this organization. Dr. Amato's research and teaching interests include marriage and marital quality, causes and consequences of divorce, parent-child relationships, and psychological distress and well-being. I'm pleased to introduce to you Dr. Paul Amato, who will take us into the future.
Thank you, Diane. Hi, everyone. I just want to begin with a little bit of advice. If you want to predict the future, never ask a social scientist. Seriously, because we have just an awful record of predicting things. Sociologists and demographers did not predict the major demographic shifts that fundamentally changed family life in the United States and the rest of the Western world in the last 50 years. Completely missed it. Similarly, economists did not foresee the Great Recession of 2007, a recession that nearly wrecked the entire world economic system. So, making predictions is a fool's errand. But because I'm well qualified for the task, I will naively rush in and share a few thoughts with you. But first, I want to go back a little bit to NCFR's early years to make a couple of points. In 1938, Ernest Burgess, who we talked about, in an early document, wrote about the various fields that he assumed would be combined within NCFR. And his list of academic and scholarly fields included child development, education, economics, and home economics, social work, family and marriage counseling, law, biology, medicine, psychiatry, psychology, sociology, and religion. A long list indeed. And interestingly, as if that list were not long enough, he also included eugenics. And that's a point I want to come back to in just a moment or two. In 1939, as you have heard, NCFR held its very first conference. And we've had conferences in almost all years, with a few exceptions. And at these early meetings of our organization, we discussed a lot of topics that are very familiar to us. We talked about research, we talked about social trends affecting the family, and we talked about family life education. In fact, if you look at the conference program for the very first meeting, there were sessions on the effects of unemployment on the family, the effects of divorce on children, and marriage education. But other sessions at that same conference seem less familiar to us. For example, there's a session on the parole system, a session on housing problems, a session on hospitalization for the poor, and a session on the social security system. The very first issue of our journal, which came out in 1939, it was called Living, included, as we might expect, empirical research on the family. There was also a summary of marriage laws in the United States at that time. And there was a discussion of marriage education courses in high school. All of those topics seem familiar and, in fact, could appear in our journals today. But the very first issue of our journal also included poetry and stories for children. In fact, in our very first issue, there was a story called 3 Horses, which tells the story of a child named Susan who grew sleepy one day and fell asleep and dreamed about 3 horses, a black horse, a brown horse, and a white horse. In the dream, she had various adventures with these 3 horses, and she couldn't decide which of the 3 horses she liked the best. So she decided to like them all equally. I think this may have been an early lesson in valuing diversity. But still, imagine an issue of JMF today, including poetry and children's stories. I mean, it's just, it just seems weird. It would just seem too weird. But at the time, it seemed like a perfectly natural thing to do. If you look back at the past 75 years of NCFR history, you will see very clearly that our organization has become narrower as it's become more focused. Although our organization always was multidisciplinary, the original concept of NCFR was for a much broader organization than the one that exists today. We don't have many members these days who are high school teachers, who are school principals, who are physicians, or family attorneys. Now, I know we have a few, but very few. If you look back to various years in NCFR's earlier history, there were times when we were much more involved in social policy than we are today. And there were years in which our organization was very international in outlook, much more so than it is today. So we might want to think about, have we become too narrow over the years? Maybe we need to open things back up again a little more. And yet, in going through those changes, we also corrected a few early mistakes. As I mentioned before, eugenics was on Ernest Burgess's list of fields that he wanted to see incorporated into NCFR. Our first conference in 1939 included a session on eugenics, and the second issue of our journal contained a comprehensive review of the field of eugenics and its implications for society. Now, at the time, people were naive, and it really wasn't until World War II that people realized what eugenics really implied. And after that, we very quickly dropped our early flirtation with that idea. And so that was a good thing. But basically, as we look back, we see how much change has occurred in NCFR over the years. And if we project forward into the future, obviously we can expect more change, because things are always changing. But I would posit to you that most of the changes that are going to come are going to be unanticipated. We are not good at predicting the future. We don't really have a good grasp of what's going to be around the corner. And I would predict that in 75 years from today, the year 2088, many aspects of NCFR will be completely foreign and unrecognizable to us. For example, I predict in the year 2088, there will be an affiliate council on Mars. That the NCFR board and president will be completely replaced with a brilliant but relatively inexpensive quantum computer. That we will attend future NCFR conferences not by traveling through space, but by immersing ourselves in highly realistic holograms that are reconstructions of meeting venues held in exotic locations like the bottom of the ocean or the moon, because anything's possible in a holographic world. And why not? And finally, due to expected and anticipated substantial increases in life expectancy, I predict that it will take 100 years rather than 25 years for people to qualify to join the legacy circle. Yet, despite these changes, which I am seriously predicting, and actually these things very well may happen, I think the core of NCFR, which is promoting family research, education, and practice, with the ultimate goal of strengthening families, will remain the same. As long as families continue to be the bedrock social institution responsible for raising and nurturing children and for enhancing personal health and psychological well-being, there will be a need for NCFR. NCFR is not going to go away. It will be different, but it will still be here in some form. Now, there are going to be some challenges going forward. For one thing, we're going to learn how to continue and perhaps better manage the tensions that exist in our organization between researchers and practitioners, between qualitative and quantitative scholars, between members with socially conservative views and members with more liberal orientations, and between members who favor political activism with those who want to focus instead on the fundamental but less glamorous job of making sure that we get our facts right. These different perspectives in our organization will never be completely reconciled. But that's okay, because it's good to have some tension in an organization like ours. It's healthy. NCFR, however, will continue to thrive as long as we voice our differences in an atmosphere of mutual respect, tolerance, and cooperation. As the founding fathers and founding mothers of the United States believed, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. And that philosophy has kept our country strong for over 200 years. And I believe that that same philosophy, perhaps paraphrased as e pluribus NCFR, will serve us well as we embrace the inevitable changes and the unpredictable future of our organization. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Paul. Did we get that on tape? Did we get that? Chris, did we get that? Aaron? Yeah, okay, we got that. Good. We'll put that on our website.